thank all of you for braving the cold, for coming out tonight. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to share some of my lifelong experiences with you. Oh, I was born June the 6th, 1933. Before you get your calculator and try to calculate that, I am 75 years of age. I was born on the Kentland farm, which is now owned by Virginia Tech. I was born in the northeast corner of it. I'm a fourth generation descendant of that farm. So I'll take you way back a little bit about the farm and how I ended up on that plantation. Shortly before the Civil War, on the farm, Mr. James Randall Kent was the proprietor of the farm. And he had gotten word that the Union soldiers was coming through that area, and so he dug a hole out somewhere on the farm and hid his gold and took his family and left. And he left the slaves there, and the Union soldiers came through, and they stayed there for 3 days in the mansion, and they slaughtered a lot of the animals there, take it with them. And Mr. Kent was a very wealthy man. And matter of fact, he was the most wealthiest man east of the Blue Ridge. And so he had 120 slaves there, and they had about 40 horses and 200 or 300 cattle, sheep, hogs. He had them all. And they had the plantation. The Kentland plantation at that time was over 200 acres. So it had vast land, and if some of you may not know where it's located down in Whitethorn, near Longshop, along the river, along New River. And it's very fertile land through there. So he raised a lot of corn and a lot of grain. At the time, there wasn't any transportation to ship it, so they shipped it up and down New River. New River apparently must have had a lot more water in it at that time to be able to do that. So he shipped it out to other places, and he had his own mill there. Mr. Kent was a politician, a farmer, a businessman. He was a surveyor, and he had many offices in Montgomery County. So after the Civil War, after the soldiers came through and feasted at the mansion for 3 or 4 days, they left. But before they left, they killed all the animals was out there. And they took the horses with them and slaughtered some animals for food to go with them. And some of the slaves left with them. So Mr. Kent and his family came back a few days after that, and he was so discarded and mentally he couldn't function. So his wife, Elizabeth Kent, took over, and she took charge of the farm and management of the farm and everything that might have been left. And she decided to assign some land to the freed slaves back in the northeast corner of the plantation, which is a wooded area not called Wake Forest. And so the slaves, having been very crafted in what they had learned on the farm, they went back in there and they started building log cabins and built themselves a home. They also built a church and later a small school. And it seemed like they went back in there and overnight seemed to become a community. And say you woke up the next morning in the forest, and it's named Wake Forest, and apparently that's how it's got its name. So I was born, as I said, I was born there, and I grew up there with my grandparents. And so it was an all-black community. We sort of sandwiched between Longshop and McCoy. A lot of times you go down and you come right through the community, you don't know it, but the church is still there and the school is still there. Well, I was educated in a 2-room school with 1 teacher, and we had a pot-belly stove in the middle of the school, and we had to go to the spring and carry water, and had outdoor toilets. So the older students there would teach the younger students, and when you got up into 5th grade or 6th grade, the 1 teacher would teach the rest of them, get you prepared to leave there and to go to Christiansburg Institute. But after doing that, after my mother worked here in Blacksburg, matter of fact, she worked, the house is still here on Main Street. If you happen to go by, it's 109 Main Street. It's a frame house. It's been under construction now. Seems like it's been under construction about 3 or 4 years. But I would come up on the weekends when I was probably 10 or 11 years of age, and spend the weekends with my mother. And my first incident or anything with being in a black community, I didn't know anything about segregation, this white and black thing, because we didn't have that problem in that black community. We were all black and we were all poor. And in that community, we did, the sports we played was baseball, was the main, and most people worked from Wake Forest. They worked in the coal mines in McCoy, and they also farmed. And so I failed to mention that the slaves that had lived there, they would walk back to the plantation on a daily and work there. Some slaves stayed there, but the free slaves, they went back and worked there because there wasn't any other work. In later years, in the 40s, is when the coal mine started to move. And the women from my community would come to Blacksburg and work in the houses here, the professors. Back in those days, most professors brought a maid with them when they came. If they didn't, they employed somebody from here. That's my mother worked for the Wilson family. He was a professor at Virginia Tech in engineering. And so I would come on weekends. We were going down, she took us downtown, took me, however, downtown and we stopped at the corner. It was called a corner drugstore. Right now it's a restaurant in there called Moe's. And some kids were there eating ice cream, so we bought some ice cream. And I wanted to sit up and have ice cream with these children. And my mother just drugged me out of that because that wasn't permitted. See, one reason I wanted to do that because the Wilsons had three children, 1 girl and 2 boys. So I played with them when I was here. When I stayed, I played with them weekends, so I hadn't experienced that. So I was probably 10, 11 years. So we got back, she explained, this is the law and this is the way it is. So that was my first. And then as I grew up in around Blacksburg, become a teenager, we would come to the Lyric Theater. And the Lyric Theater, I see a lot of articles about the Lyric Theater, but they don't really tell the real truth. We were on the 2nd floor. It's a door on the side there. You don't see it now because they've covered it up. We had to walk upstairs to the balcony on the 2nd floor. That's where the blacks went to the movie there. But that's if we got a place. The cadets had first choice. They would fill up the first floor and into the 2nd floor. And if there's any room left, that's when we got to go to the movie. And they had 2 movies, they had a first and a second movie, a 7 and a 9. So some cases, we didn't get to go to the movie. We could go across the street. There was another theater called a Little Theater, and we went across the street to the Little Theater. And so it didn't cost us, but I remember we paid 17 cents to go to the movie. And we usually went down there and other incidents are the cadets would see maybe a black walking up the street. They would form up 4 abreast and just push you off the street into the traffic. So that was another one of my experiences there. And we had to go to the back of the restaurants where during the day, all blacks went to the back of the restaurant. But most of the cooks were black cooks during that time. Even later, when I'd gone into the military and came back, I decided I was going to stop at, it's called the bus station. It's up there, well, the Hoke House now. That was called the bus station because the bus stopped there all the time, you know. So I decided to go in for coffee, and I went to the back. It's a side door, which is considered the back door for us. I went in, they poured the coffee for me, and they poured it in the cup that you normally serve there. So since I was expecting to pour it in a paper cup, so I would walk out. So since they poured it, I sat down to drink it. So they went back into the kitchen, had a little discussion. Well, I was a black or foreign students. At that time, the foreign students had started to come into Virginia Tech, so they couldn't figure out who I was. So they finally decided that I was black. So they came out and took the cup and pulled it out of my cup and pulled it over into the paper cup and asked me to leave. And said if I didn't leave, they're going to call the police on me. Just so happened I was sitting there with two cadets, and we started up a conversation. They was curious about what was going on in Korea. And so when they came back, they told me, say, you stay here and talk. Say, you leave when you finish. When you get ready to leave, we'll protect you. So that was some of my experiences here in Blacksburg. So after moving on now over to the campus of Virginia Tech. When I was young at Virginia Tech, we had to, at football games, we sat on the bleacher areas, and they had a great big cardboard sign there marked colored across and that's where we sat. And usually it was about 8 or 10 grown men were there, and they would be drinking liquor and betting on Wingo. Wingo was the running back. They was betting how many yards he would get on each carry. And we were just sitting off to the side, and there's probably just about 10 of us young boys. So there's my experience at Tech football. So I have been a Tech football fan since the 40s. I've practically seen every game they played in Blacksburg since the 40s. But then after I left this area and went into, I was drafted right out of high school into during the Korean War. And I left and went to Georgia for training. The military, this 1953, the military was desegregating all the services at the time. They had told us that we better not be caught with two blacks together, more than two blacks together, or two whites together. So we're supposed to mingle and mix up and socially. So sometimes we get ready to go over to the movie or the barbershop or anywhere we went. If it was just two of us, we'd have to go to the next barracks and get a white soldier to walk with us, and vice versa. They had to do the same thing because we couldn't get caught more than two. And they really integrate the service. And one reason they told us we all were going to Korea, and one reason they were doing it because you get to Korea and that communist bullet or grenade come into your bunker, it doesn't discriminate whether you're white or black. It's going to kill you or maim you and say this white soldier, black soldier beside is going to be the one that's going to pull you out. So while in the service, while I was down in Georgia, they looked on my record, they saw that I had barbering training. So they called me over and said, you're the barber of the company, and nobody's going to have any excuse for not getting a haircut. So being at Christiansburg Institute, it was an all-black school, and I had been trained to cut all black people's hair. So for the first week or so, I got by with that just because the black soldiers just lined up, I cut the hair. So after a while, the non-blacks and whites, because they started lining up for a haircut, and I had no idea what to do. So it was praying time. So the closer they got to the nervous, after they got up and we was cutting off a foot locker, and so I found out I could do it. I could cut the hair, but I couldn't take it off the top. I didn't know how to take it off the top. So after I knew the following week they'd be back, so I went over to the PX, the Post Exchange, and asked if they had a barbershop. Then they had one black barber working there, so I went into him and told him my situation, that I need to know how to take the hair off the top of White's head. And he said, I don't know, sir, I'm just here I'm assigned here just to cut the black soldiers' hair. But he carried me over to a white barber, and he taught me how to do it. So when I went back, I knew how to do it, and so it's been history ever since. So I learned to learn it on an accident. So now back to Virginia Tech. I would happen to be here in probably one of the, when I was in Korea, the first student at Virginia Tech oh, Irving Pedro, which came in. My grandmother wrote and told me about it because it was really history. And while I was over there, but when I came back in '55, out of the first three that came, another one was named Floyd Wilson. None of the three graduated from Virginia. They came in '53. So the second wave of three came when I got back in '55. I didn't have to go looking for them. They found me because they needed a haircut. So one reason, prior to '53, one girl had applied for Virginia Tech, and she was denied because she was studying business. The rule then, the law of the state of Virginia is separate but equal. It was separate, but definitely not equal. So this is how the three students came. Lindsay Cherry, Charlie Yates, and Matthew Winston. When they came, they all wanted to study engineering, and it wasn't nowhere in the state of Virginia, none of the all-black schools was teaching engineering. So Tech had no excuse for not letting them in, and this is how they got to Virginia Tech. And prior to their coming here, they, in their letter for admission, they had arranged for housing not too far from here on Clay Street with the Hodges. And I happened to be part of the welcome party when they came. And what they would do during that time, the president of the college would invite the non-black students over to the house or the mansion over on the college president's house. It was Dr. Newman. He to have tea and cookie with Mrs. and Mr. Dr. and Mrs. Newman, and to shake their hands. Meanwhile, they had employed a gentleman to haul the three black students around Blacksburg and show them Blacksburg. There really wasn't much more than the 16 squares of Blacksburg, but they for a long time, they kept this practice up for a long time, and the black students didn't know that this was going on. At the time, I didn't know it either. So that was their introduction to Virginia Tech. In their letter, and not before they got here, Virginia Tech sent delegates down there to their home and to try to discourage them from coming to Tech. And these are people from the administration here at Tech. But when they got the letter, they told them where they would be staying, and they told them they could only attend the classes. They was off-campus students. Back then, off-campus students only could stay off campus if you were married. But they stayed off campus, and they could just go to class and come back off campus. Even if they bought a soda in the building I was in, they'd have to take the soda and keep walking. They couldn't eat it there. So, but they knew this, and so they accepted the challenge, and they bore a burden for black students behind them to come behind them to be here, and they all had to be in the military, and that created some problem for them. Sometimes you go over there and they had drill at the drill field on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they had to change uniforms, so they had to go into the bathrooms on the college and change uniforms. And occasionally some of the cadets would let them change in their room. And it all wasn't really bad for them. It was bad enough, but there were some students that really helped them. And so I remember one girl from Orange, Virginia. She was instrumental in helping them a lot for us, really telling them what was going on, telling them some of the classes to stay out. There was one professor on the college, he had vowed that no black student was going to pass his class regardless of what grade they made. So they knew who he was, and they stayed out of that class. And they had a sort of haven at the Y. They could go in squads. At the time it was called SAB, Student Activity Building, the same place where Squires is now. Oh, so they, Dr. I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Darren was over the wire, directors of the wire at that time. And so they would go up to the wire and they could get a sandwich downstairs, go up to the wire or drink it. So they did have that pleasure there. Oh, so each has known them. In the barbershop, at the barbershop, I was the manager of the barbershop, and I had instructions to cut the hair before 8 o'clock or after 6. I could not cut the hair during the regular opening hours. So they would come after 6 o'clock, and I would cut their hair. But after a while, as the years went on, not just 3 came, sometimes 4 and 5 each year, and it got so that we were real busy with cadets because the college was most of the students at that time, they all were cadets. We did have a few civilian students, grad students, and some girls. And so after a while, it got so many, the other barbers would leave at 6 o'clock and would just leave me there, and I'll end up maybe 2 more hours and sometimes 3 hours cutting those guys' hair. So it came April of '62, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I'd worked hard all one day, and so I just made a grand announcement. As of now, you would get your hair cut from 8 to 6, which they started coming at 8 to 6. When they did that, the rest of the barbers cut their hair. So the manager didn't find out about it until during the summer. I would leave Blacksburg and go to Quantico, the Marine Corps school, and as a barber up there because they needed a lot of barbers. And when the cadets leave during the summer, there weren't too many students here, but just a few people, mostly teachers, coming back to Tech to do graduate work. So it wasn't enough work for all of us, and some of us barbers that weren't married, we left and went to Quantico because they needed a lot of barbers up there. So the manager found out during the summer, one of the janitors went out and told them that they call us colors, that they cutting them colors back there. So he came in and asked the man, Mr. Morgan, the guy that I left there, who gave him permission. And he told him that Johnson gave me permission to do this. So he said, I'll take it up with him when he gets back. To this day, he hadn't said a word to me. He found out that the sky wasn't going to fall. So that was the integration of the barbershop back then. So I forgot to mention, during the time when Blacksburg, when I first moved up here, during the time I was coming up, it's a community that they call Newtown. Newtown was a black community. Collegiate Square is located in that area now. And you hear a lot about the Odd Fellows. And that was the social center for Newtown. The black families did live other places. They lived on Progress Street and Jackson Street and Lee Street and Clay Street. And the church now is on Clay Street and Penn Street. And the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church on Clay Street, Penn Street, is the Methodist Church, AME Methodist Church. And so the blacks lived out in Newtown, but they worked at the college. And during that time, a lot of the blacks had jobs. They was shoemakers, shoe repair on the college. The cleaners, they worked in the cleaners. And the barber before I went there, it's been black barbers on the campus ever since. They had old #1 barracks up on the hill, and it was in the basement. And a matter of fact, it's in a movie that was done recently, probably about 10 years, in the basement, called Two Separate Paths. I understand they show it to the Corps every year when they come in, and so they called from out in Washington someplace and asked me to do that, and I just told them I didn't have time for it. And so they finally kept on calling and said, well, will you take the time off your business for $300? I said, yeah. So they gave me $300 to be in the movie. Because I kind of think this business school, the Pamplin, this Mr. Pamplin, he came here and his son came here. So I cut his son's hair, but I didn't know it, but he remembered it. And they told him that I was still here. So from now, we'll move on to, I'll go through with the black students who are here. Oh, I was really the person they leaned on me. They leaned on me all 4 of those years. Oh, so I introduced them to the social part, such as it was in Blacksburg. And I knew, I had graduated from high school, I knew a lot of the high school students. We went to high school footballs, games, and dances, or wherever. So they would, one of them, Lindsay, would come through the barber shop on Thursday and want to know where the party is for Saturday. So they would want to go home from time to time. And I took them all the way to Norfolk, maybe twice. And I got tired driving to Norfolk. I let them use my car and go drive themselves down there. But on weekends, they always wanted to go to a college where they knew students from high school. So every weekend, we'd be headed out to one of the colleges around the state, Hampton, Virginia State, Union. I had slept in the Bergs, all those, all the way in West Virginia, with West Virginia State, which is out in Institute in Charleston, in Bluefield State. And they decided we were going to go all the way down to Tuskegee. So one of my cousins had graduated, and he wanted to go down for the weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. So 2 of us, the students, and the 4 of us went down. And it was during the height of the civil rights movement, and things were real tense down through the southern states. We drove down to Tennessee, and they drove that far, and then they decided they was going to take a drink of alcohol, and they put me behind the wheel to drive all the way through the state, and told me, we filled up and said, don't stop until we get to Tuskegee. So I pretty well drove all the way to Tuskegee. After we got to Tuskegee, we had one of the students had a Virginia Tech sweater on, and his name Matthew Winston. So the Tuskegee students, that was in 1958, they couldn't conceive of the idea that it was a black at Virginia Tech. So we stayed on the campus, and during the time, so they sort of staked us, I followed us around, and we came to the dining room and to have lunch. So they sat across the table from it. It was 3, 1 girl and 2 boys. And he told them he's studying engineering at Virginia Tech. So they worked out a math problem, I guess a real hard problem. He pushed it across the table and said, solve this problem. He did it very quickly and pushed it back across there. So they sort of, the sports person of the group was a girl, and they got their heads together and they talked a little while about it. And then then they looked up at him saying, we believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are in somebody's college, but you dang sure is not in Virginia Tech. So they also used my car to go to the airport, because most of them were taking pilot training here. And at the time, you couldn't just leave right off campus. You had to go out to one of those bridges and come back to the airport. So I had bought a 56 Ford after it came out of the military. And by the time one didn't graduate, the one that Lindsay Cherry, the one always wanted to know about a party. He left and went to New York, I guess so he could party 24/7. But the other 3 graduated. Charlie Yates graduated. He's the first the black to graduate here, and he graduated in '58. And he went after his graduation, he came back to the house, and he got on his bike and went out to Newtown and got married, went to the minister's house and got married. And I had promised him to let him use my car for his go on his honeymoon, but it was just supposed to be for 24 hours. So it was 3 days later when I saw my car. By the time the 4 of them had graduated, I had to buy another car. My car was worn out. So I had to get another car. And I was thinking, I was clear, by that time, James Whitehurst came to school here, and Bob Wells, they came. And I was around the house, and they came part of the welcoming party. And so they started wearing my other car out. But they really had some hard times from time to time. I mentioned Wells. Wells was very fair complected, and had straight hair. But so one day, so I usually would hear what went on in the car at the school, because I later got a room in the same boarding house they were. And Wells came in one day and said they called him out of class at Virginia Tech, called him over to Burroughs Hall, asked him why did he lie on his application. And, excuse me. He said, here you got on your application, you're a black person, here you showing up a white person. So he said, call my family. Say, how can they do with it? So that's one thing that happened to him. And the same Bob Wells decided in the spring break that he's going to just go out in the West, or out in Arizona, someplace out there, and work on a ranch for the summer. So his father and mother came up here. First person they came running to me, wanted to know where Bob Wells was. I had no idea because I didn't know where he was. And so he stayed out there the 3 months without letting them know where he was. And then he finally, when the summer school came, he came on back and started school. So, but they looked all over and went all over campus and went to Burroughs Hall and all over the place. Then they finally thought they couldn't find out. Then they came back to the shop master and said, you sure you don't know where Bob is? So, but the other gentleman, James Whitehead, he decided to come to Tech, and he was going to desegregate everything here. And so he really had a hard time. He was the first to go to the ring dance. He was the first to live in the dormitory. And on the second floor, it said that when he moved on the second floor, everybody moved off. So he's going to have a room, but he ended up with a whole floor. and his first attempt to play football, that didn't last but a few days. He found out football wasn't for him. So he tried to get the other black students. By the time when he got here, it might have been 25 or maybe 30 black students here. And so, but they wouldn't go along with what he wanted to do, so he just set out to do it himself. But he really paid the price for it. We went to the ring dance. The students voted for him to go to ring dance, and as if you had to vote. Everybody was going, but in his case, he had to be voted to go. And I found the problem wasn't the students mainly. It was the older, the staff and people that was doing all this. It wasn't the students, because everything that he sort of wanted to get into, the students didn't mind it. The fraternity, they couldn't join the fraternity, so they would vote him in. And when it comes to the other staff, they said, you can't be in it. He didn't know his date stayed at my house, because at that time it wasn't any hotels and motels in Blacksburg. You had to stay with family. They stayed at my house, and they were already go to the ring dance, and it was about an hour before we got a call that, oh, you can't come because we know that the students have voted for you to come, but they have some kind of ring. I've never been to ring dances where the girls line up and guys line, and they say your date may be insulted by some of these Southern belles. You can't come. Then finally, Dr. Dean, he's the student, director of students, and he told him he could go with he and his wife. So they came by and picked him up. He did go to the ring dance, which was down in the old World Memorial Gym at the time, and they set up in the balcony. But the students started yelling for him to come on down. So finally, they went on down, they danced and joined. They got a standing ovation. So everything was fine, but that was the problem. The students weren't the problem at the time. It was just the old heads here, to put it like it is. They were the problem. So I'll go into school integrations in this area. This is Blacksburg, Montgomery County. Blacksburg, in Blacksburg, the elementary school set up there where you get it used to be the high school, then the middle school, it's the empty school. That area was where the Blacksburg black, they call it the colored school. That's where it was. They moved it when they got ready to build this school up here, and moved it over on Harding Avenue, the school over there on Harding Avenue. And they went to one gentleman whom he was a barber, and he for some reason, they picked him to be the spokesperson for the black community. And he didn't have a chicken or child in school, but he approved the plan. The plan was just a 2-room school with no library or no lunchroom in it. And it had 2 teachers there, principal and 2 teachers there. So the black community didn't like that. And at the time, I did have 2 children in the school. You know, so so I might mention, we in Blacksburg, you had a group called the Human Relations Council, which was quite instrumental in desegregating Blacksburg, and making Blacksburg the special place you live in now. And some of those people are in this room. And they would meet, the NAACP was around too, but they weren't vocal. They sort of stayed behind. You didn't know what they were doing. So this group, the Human Relations Council of Montgomery County and Radford, I think that was the title. They met in local churches, the local churches that would let us meet in, and a lot of the churches wouldn't let the organization meet in their churches. So there was a few that let them meet in it. So they formed. They decided that Blacksburg is not going to be like these other communities around us. There's not going to be any rioting in Blacksburg. There's not going to be any buildings burned down. There's not going to be any fire or any crosses burned in Blacksburg. So we're going to do something about it. We don't want this to happen in our community. And so they set out to do something about it. You know, they broke up into committees to go out and talk to the locals about desegregating their facilities, the restaurants, theaters, or whatever. I happen to be on the one that go out to the banks. Me and Dr. Alls, Charles Alls, you might see him around. You know, we were on the same committee to go out and talk to the bank presidents or whomever was in charge. And we was also to go to the industries about jobs. So we set out and got that accomplished. Other people went to the local stores, or to the theaters, the restaurants, and within about 6 months, everything turned out to be peaceful. And we didn't have that problem that other communities had. But I give the credit to foresighted, good people in the town of Blacksburg. They came together and did this. And this is one reason that you enjoy some of the places of Blacksburg and made it a special place today. So after this organization did that, things became so much better, a better place to live here. So I'll mention about Christiansburg Institute. That's the all-black school. It's still in Christiansburg. The land is still there. It's down there where, if you know where Christiansburg High School, that was built on the same property. There was the beginning of Christiansburg Institute was a Captain Charles Schaefer, a Quaker from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania. He came through this area as a Union soldier, and he got wounded in this area, and he made a vow or promise to God if he didn't die and he got better, that he'd come back to this area and set up some schooling for the freed slave children, which he did. He went there and he was a part of the Freedmen's Bureau of Philadelphia. I understand it's a Quaker organization. And so they told him if he could come back and find some land, somebody donate some land and get some in-kind help, that they would support him financially, which he did. He came back and he set up a church in Christiansburg, the Schaefer Memorial Church. It's named after Captain Schaefer, and it's still being used. And it was set up it was back in about I don't know, in the 1800s. It's about 135 or 40 years old. And beside it, he built the school, you know. And so then he was the minister, the first minister at the church, and he was the school teacher to teach the children. So he was everything at first until he finally got some help. And the school is beside the church. It still stands there too. It's not it's the second school, but it's still there. And after the children went up to the 7th grade and they still want to go to school, there wasn't any school for them to go to. So then this when he convinced the Quakers to give him some more money to move over to where you see the high school is now, in that area. So they moved over there. I think it's in the 1890s when they moved over there. But prior to that, the school was 100 years. It was established even before Virginia Tech. It was 1866 when Christiansburg Institute was established. Virginia Tech, I think, is 1872 or something like that. So the Quakers supported the school all the way up until 1947. And they set up not only that school, they set up one in Manassas called Manassas Institute, and they set up another one somewhere in the south side of Virginia. And that's the only school, for some reason, they supported it all the way up to that time. Then they turned it over to the counties. There's Floyd, Montgomery, and Rapid City, and Pulaski. And so so when I got ready to go to Christiansburg Institute, and I graduated from this little small school, my mother and my grandmother called me off to the side and sat me down and said, now we like, my grandmother had a 3rd grade education. My mother had a 6th grade education, and they wanted me to have more. So they say, but they said, we don't have the money to send you to college. Say, you have to go to Christiansburg Institute. It was called Christiansburg Industrial Institute because they had they had taught trades over there, and they also had the high school academic part. So when you graduate, you had both. So I knew that I had to do something when I got over. So when you go there, they have what you call exploratory courses. Your freshman year, they put you in 6 weeks into all this. They had carpentry, bricklaying, and plumbing. They call it pipe fitting back then. They had barbering and agricultural. And over the 100 years, whatever was needed in the community or in the world, that's what they taught. At one time, they was the nurses, and then they had wheel cartwright and whatever they was teaching it then. So after going through all of these courses, I found out that barbering was my cup of tea. So I ended up you would go 1/2 a day for barbering for 2 years, and you get your certificate as barbering as a junior. So I ended up as a barber, not thinking that I'd still be leaving the barber shop, coming up here still today, still at it, but that wasn't what I never thought I would do that. Because my hopes was to be a lawyer. So a little bit about Christiansburg Institute. I had to get up and leave about 7 o'clock in the morning and ride the school bus over to Christiansburg Institute. And when you got there, the Quakers wanted the religion to be taught there as well. And they would, you had 15 minutes of religious devotion. And they assigned a homeroom. You go to your homeroom and have your 15 minutes of religious devotion. Then you go to your first class period. And so after that, it was about 5 class periods. And the school we had football, all the sports, there was a large and they taught some students who were college bound. They had a different curriculum than the ones that weren't. And so, but they did have a lot of sports there, and they had dormitory students there too. We call them dorm students, but they call them day students, I think. We called us day students. They came from near and far. Christiansburg Institute back in that days was one of the accredited high schools in the region in the South, really. And so it might have been, I never saw anybody from North Carolina except the teachers of North Carolina. No students. We had students from Connecticut, Delaware, D.C., and West Virginia, all over the place, dorm students. There's about 40 dorm students. They had a girls' dorm and a boys' dorm. And in the center, in between them, was the class building, which is still over Edgar A. Long building, which is being the process of being restored. And the girls' dorm was on the east side of the building, and the boys on the west. and we were forbidden to go through what they call the girls' door, the side down. If you got caught going through there, you got punished. You find yourself out on the campus picking up paper, and everybody know you'd gone through the wrong door. So even to this day, I have not gone through that door. So they had real strict rules, and you really abide by them, or you get expelled from school. But if you did something small, like smoking a cigarette or something, you end up picking up paper. And it's always at lunchtime. You have to spend your lunchtime picking up paper off the campus. So in the early years of that school, the students studied a half a day, the first half of the day, and the second half they went out on the field and worked to pay for their tuition. A lot of them couldn't afford to pay for their tuition, so this is how they paid for their tuition. The counties around, like Floyd County and Giles County, when their students graduated, they would send them to Christiansburg Institute, but they paid the tuition for them at Christiansburg Institute. So it graduated. There was about 400 students when I was there, and we had 20 had a principal and administrative staff or secretary and support, and about 16 teachers. And they had about 16 buildings. It was scattered. It really looked like a small junior college. And I remember seeing football teams come up and they get off the bus, they look around, say, oh, we the wrong place. We playing a junior college, so they get scared. But our school would go all the way to Tennessee to play junior college for Thanksgiving. So it graduated a lot, and the other students were bussed in from Pulaski and Radford and Floyd when I was there as well. I was there from 49 to 53. The school closed when integration first in the state of Virginia, it was separate but equal. Then they changed the law to massive resistance. This is the government of Virginia. And later they changed it to freedom choice. And so when they did that, that's when a lot of the families in this area decided to take their children out and put them into the other schools. So then all of a sudden, in 1956, the Christiansburg Institute didn't have enough students to operate, and so they abruptly closed the school. And so, as now we're having a hard time, we're restoring that one building, the Egg Long building, and to make a museum and really have classes there as well. There's going to be some other buildings there. There's one building there going to be an industrial art building that the local contractors, the building contractors in this area, is financing it because they're saying they're having trouble finding qualified people to work, so they want to train them there. So we hopefully going to get that building restored. So all in all, don't want to bore you the rest of the night. I could mention, so I would glad to be here to be with you. I would like to say my grandmother, whom was a slave at the Kent Land Plantation, never imagined being a free person. That's my great-great-grandmother. Get this chain. They also have a slave cemetery down there. We went to Christiansburg and found out the names of some of the people buried there. The cemetery, no tombstones or anything there, because over the years it just got lost. They was grazing cattle over in the cemetery and also raising corn in the same barn. And some of the elder members from the Wake Forest community went down. Some people got curious because we've always heard that it was a cemetery, a slave cemetery, that we didn't know where it was. So one gentleman came down from Detroit and he called them over and showed them where it is. So now we have put a marker down there at the cemetery, and once a year we go down and have prayer and service at the cemetery. And it's usually the same day that some of you want to see the mansion down there. Oh, they have a celebration there at the same time. It's in the spring, and there's some organization from Blacksburg, I don't know which one. So, but my great-great-grandmother never imagined ever being a free person. My grandmother never imagined of having a telephone or electricity or an automobile. My mother never imagined a man going to the moon and satellites. And I personally never imagined having a biracial president in the White House. So my soul looks back and wonder. Thank you so very much for your time tonight.